My name is Martin Anthony Nsubuga, the CEO of UBRA. Because of the COVID environment, we treasure our health and all the people near us. But for purposes of this discussion, you allow me to remove my mask. The journey of UBRA is quite an interesting one, but I'll begin more from the reform process. The reform process of the entire pension sector started way back in 2003. Fortunately, I was privy to know a part of that process, as I was given the responsibility to spearhead the task force at the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Prior to that, there was a stakeholders transmission group that helped us to bake this idea of pension reform. And the main ideas for that pension reform were mainly three. The first one was to have efficiency in the sector, to ensure that our members' funds are well protected, well invested, well managed. The second one was to create a regulator to provide the oversight function, because by that time, there are only two known pension schemes in this country. That was the NSSF and the Public Service Pension Scheme. But again, there are several other unregistered pension schemes where members' funds were being lost at one point in time. There are also cases of where there are no disclosures by the employers and the companies that had some form of inbuilt rewards for their staff for pension purposes. So there was no separation in that case. And the third one, which was also critical, was to create a base of professionals in this market to support its operation from a lower level that it was at that point in time to a level that is comparable world over to attract professionals in the market. The fourth one, which was secondary, the first three are the primary objectives. The fourth one was more of the secondary one, but equally very important, to create a buffer of long-term savings that can support the country's economic growth, from which a different sorts of financing can be leveraged on because of the mobilization that had been made. Those were the main informative issues that drove the pension reform. But again, as I've said, the sector had a lot of challenges which caused this reform process. The first challenge was basically mismanagement of members' funds. For those who have been in this country for long, 2000 thereabout, I wouldn't go beyond that. There are a series of loss of funds, not only in NSSA but also in the public service, mismanagement of funds, poor records of members, a lot of complaints, low returns because the funds were poorly invested. So there were a lot of issues, and worst of all, the serious governance issues. The trustees who were interested to do that role had serious governance issues. They were not professional in doing things. They did not take the fiduciary responsibility to that high level that gave the assurance of members' funds to be protected. We never had professionals in this market, so anybody would come in and say, I can do this investment. So you could see all sorts of investments, all sorts of lost records, all sorts of custodians who are not even licensed, a lot. So in the wisdom of government who supported the reform, say, you know what? This is a very important sector in this country. And if you want to nurture it to the next level, we need to create a strong foundation for it. Now the debate started. The first cabinet paper or reform paper was omnibus. Let's have the reform things that we were thinking about in one documentation. Let's have the regulator in place. Let's have all the things we want to protect the sector in place. Let's have a law that will create different functionalities, because we are creating a segregated functionality. And let's also have a law that will enhance the investment function, which was very critical at that point in time. Of course, in the long term, they were looking at if other players were coming onto this market, how were they going to play in this space? So it was a very huge omnibus bill. Not even a bill, the draft cabinet paper. Then in the wisdom again of our cabinet, under the able leadership of His Excellency the President, they said, you know what? Let us fast track the regulator in place who is going to oversee the implementation of what we are talking about. That gave birth to the fast tracking of creating the regulator, who was established by an Act of Parliament of 2011. You can imagine the time frame. The reform process started in 2003, thereabout, but the act established to create the regulator came in 2011. That shows how demanding or how challenging pension reforms are. Uganda is not very unique, by the way. This is a world over challenge. Pension reforms are very difficult to implement. So we are very fortunate that by 2011, the law came into place and it was assented to by His Excellency the President in September of that year. But again, the process of now creating the function of the regulator started by appointing the board of OBRA, which started thereabout in 2012. And the only item that my chairman was given, that is Council Derek Kasiri, Mr. Derek Kasiri, Andrew, was only given the OBRA Act. Please go and start the regulator. I was still at the Minister of Finance. So the first entry point was to have a focused regulatory regime. The act is there, but there are no enabling regulations to kickstart the process. Besides that, there was no structure in place to start the authority to function. And again, there are so many unlicensed entities, like I've mentioned earlier, which were a big challenge in this market. Fortunately, the market responsiveness was extremely very, very good. I can say that trust was built on day one. When the regulator was put in place with the skeleton staff, I was not part of the establishment team. The focus on creating the regulation, putting in place a structure, and then looking for office space, putting facilities, capabilities that will enable the quick start of the regulator. The first interim CEO, who is Mr. Moses Baker, who is the advisor of the Minister of Finance, was given that responsibility. You kickstart with the chairman using the act that has been there. They did their work. Along the way, in the wisdom of the Minister of Finance then, they thought we needed, and I think that was Honorable Saida Bumba who started it. And thereafter, Honorable Maria Chuanuka, who said, you know what, let us first employ the expertise of an experienced international person to bring the international experience into this market. And that's when they brought in Mr. David Bonyi-Nyekunde, who then recruited me, said, you know what, I needed a director for supervision. Since you've been part of this reform process, you know what has been happening in this sector very well. You can support the functionality. Fortunately, the minister had also done a lot of work to train some of us. Initial supervision, investment analysis, finance and governance. So we had a good background, all sorts of expertise that we could leverage on. Not so founded, but at least as a country, that would have been very, very good for a start. And it worked very well. So I joined this institution in July 2016 as a Director of Supervision and Compliance. So along the way, in the wisdom of the minister, when the contract of my predecessor expired, who also said, I think I've set the foundation for this institution. When Mr. Nyekunde came, there was some capabilities in this institution. The supervisory framework needed to be enhanced. There are some guidelines which needed to be put in place. But by and large, the trust was building and getting on enhanced day by day. So I came in thereabout and also leveraged on the foundation that had been built. What have we been able to deliver for that time, which is probably the most critical thing? Remember what was the terms of reference: creating a regulator to support that efficiency as far as regulation is concerned. 2, to provide protection of members' funds. 3, to provide or to grow the professionalism in the sector in terms of capabilities and delivery of service. And of course 5, which I said was a secondary one, to create a means, a foundation that can spur the growth or the mobilization of long-term savings. I can say in the initial stages it was very difficult. It was very difficult to identify who the schemes were supposed to be. But with support of our government and with support of the system that we have in place, we were able to identify all the schemes in this market. And of course, there was also a trust that was built. When the regulator came into place, there was also a fear that, these people are creating a foundation from which they're going to take all members' funds and government is going to use it, which was wrong information. And I think there are some people who are trying to spread wrong information about the establishment of the regulator, which was misleading. So what we saw, the schemes that were there at that time for purposes of providing pension for their staff, for their future of some sort, we started to see them winding up, saying, we need to pay them out. There's a new venture that government has created that is going to take this money. So it was wrong information. Fortunately, when the regulator started operating, they realized that actually the function of the regulator was to build trust and to protect members' funds. The responsiveness then changed. To date, we are talking of 67 schemes. Remember, we started with 3 regulated entities. Today, we are talking of 67 schemes in this market. Of course, the giant still remains NSSF. Public service is also on its way to be reformed into a defined benefit scheme, a defined contributory scheme. The cabinet, again under the able leadership of His Excellency the President, has agreed to reform the public service pension scheme from a defined benefit scheme into a contributory scheme. And the issue here is to create a foundation of a scheme that is going to be funded from the onset and also taking recognition of all the benefits that members have accrued, that is the pension rights of the current members and also those who are pensioners into the sector. Other achievements that we've been able to do apart from the schemes that I've talked about, we see an emergence of participating employers. Currently we are talking of 168 participating employers who are having some form of arrangements that are in-house, but who opted to work under an umbrella scheme to support their cause. So I can say we are having over 230 pension plans in this market to date, against which what we used to have in the past. We had like 3 plans at that point in time, and we're talking of registered and regulated schemes.
Keep your loved ones connected with Airtel voice bundles as they stay home safe. You can now gift any of the Airtel voice bundles to your loved ones free of charge. Yes, gifting of voice bundles is absolutely free of charge. All you have to do is dial *100*2*6#. Select from daily, weekly, monthly, Chavise, Zawise, or even night bundles. Enter number you are gifting, select pay using airtime or Airtel money to complete transaction. Gift any Airtel voice bundle and keep your loved ones connected at no cost. Airtel, the smartphone network.
The Ministry of Health informs the general public that we have registered some deaths in Uganda due to COVID-19. This is a reminder that COVID-19 is real, deadly, and we are all at risk. Let us be more vigilant to prevent the further spread of the disease in our communities. As responsible citizens, ensure that you regularly wash your hands with soap and running water, or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Properly wear a face mask covering your mouth, nose and chin while in public. Maintain a social distance of at least 2 meters between yourself and another person. Avoid anyone with a cold or flu-like symptoms. Cover your nose and mouth when sneezing and coughing. Avoid touching your eyes, nose and mouth with unwashed hands. Be vigilant. Stay safe. This message is from the Ministry of Health.
Now we also have administrators who are really doing a very good job in this market. And the administrators provide that extra skill in terms of keeping good record of members. Remember the problems I talked about? Poor records, poor documentation, loss of details of a member, intentionally or unintentionally or otherwise. Now we have automated systems for members' funds, recorded, documented, contributions well recorded as they come in on a monthly basis, benefits paid on time. That's an improvement which never used to be the case in the past. Members are getting financial statements regularly. It doesn't matter whether you are under NSSF or you are under any other occupational scheme, you can get your statement as regular as possible. So that function is also well entrenched in this market. Now, the other one which wasn't very prominent, but it was problematic in this market, which was governance. The governance problem was a serious one. And in the drafting of this bill, the framers of the Act thought of more of empowering the trustees, who are the board of directors, to run these schemes on behalf of members. Remember, schemes are made of members in hundreds, in numbers, for each scheme. So all of them can't be entrusted to run this scheme. So in this case, they appointed trustees, and the process of appointing of a trustee is now documented in the guideline, their member nominees and their employer nominees. And the issue here is that the scheme is segregated from the sponsor or from the employer, and subsequently established as a separate entity to support the functionality of the members and the interest of their stakeholders. So trustees are established, empowered to run these schemes on behalf of members. Of course, the challenge we are facing to date, because of the involvement of trustees, their level of competences are not that high-ended, and the sector is very technical, highly requiring those important skills to develop this sector and to run it. So along the way, again with the support of the Minister of Finance, we've been getting funding and we've been able to train these trustees. And recently, we launched a trustee certification program. And the essence of it is to enhance the competences of trustees to serve in this space and help us deliver on this cause. So we can say that as the regulator, we've built a strong foundation to address the issues that were identified in the past that were very, very critical in the sector. We've been able to do that in less than 7 years, and I think we can see the future very, very bright. But there's also a secondary contribution of this sector. To us it is secondary because that's not our primary establishment, but the emergence of long-term savings in this sector. Remember, the strategy is create a foundation, build trust and confidence, then you can see all the funds well invested and all members beginning to contribute consistently because you built that trust. We are human beings in this entity, but that trust is supported by the functionality that the government established with us, which is an act of parliament giving us capabilities, structures in place, and also the skills we've developed to monitor, to supervise, and to also sanction those who have not fallen in line in terms of non-compliance. So that trust has been built, which has supported the development of this long-term saving that everybody is talking about. So we now see a growth in assets under management from less than 4 trillion before the establishment of the regulator to around 15 trillion to date. NSSF accounts for 13 trillion to date. The other schemes that we are not known about have contributed 2 trillion to date. That is a big amount that has gone in, that has emerged. And the growth rate has consistently been at 20% over this period in time. And we anticipate it to continue for the next 10 years or thereabout. The other critical point to note that our contribution to GDP was less than 5% in 2000 thereabout, or 2002, but today we are talking of almost 11% of GDP in 5 years. That's a huge contribution. Again, it's because of the foundation that was set by government, the trust that has been built in the regulator, the supervisory framework that is enhanced by the regulator to provide that continuous assurance that members' funds are always monitored and supervised. Now, we need to continuously enhance this oversight, the supervisory framework. So we are building a risk-based supervision framework which is highly robust enough in order to match the growth in the sector. And we believe that in the next 2 years, our supervisory framework would be very robust and very, very active, such that we can identify the risks in real time and be able to respond to them quickly. In doing that, we shall be able to provide an immediate response to the market and assurance to the members and continuous assurance that your funds are protected and well invested. Secondly, we think we need to reach out to the many members who have not yet appreciated the principle of saving for retirement. So that idea is also ongoing strongly. We think we need to go back to the drawing board in terms of our framework, in terms of having also an independent system to tap into the informal sector and give them that support to grow. With this foundation, we can attest that the sector is not only growing very fast, but it has created a very strong foundation that can be entrusted upon not only by the schemes that are being regulated by us, but by the wider public, that their funds are well regulated. I can confirm to this by the comments we get from the members of parliament. We regulate their scheme strongly, and they are very satisfied by the way the regulator is doing its business. The NSSF today is not of the NSSF of 2000. You can see the capabilities that have been enhanced. They're not coming from the blue. They're informed by the work of the regulator and the reform process that started way back in 2000. So it is not by coincidence or by accident that these things are happening today. They're being informed by a foundation that has been set, a process that was thought through by government way back in 2000, that has been nurtured up to date, and we continue to provide that substantial assurance and confidence that a long-term savings that are being established are not only for the long term of 10 years, but rather long-term beyond 20 years thereabout, because the savings are for long term. And of course, the final one, members will continue to have that confidence in us. They will continue to save. We see the contribution levels increasing day by day. We also see efficiency and prudence in the investment of members' funds. All these put together are providing a very strong foundation upon which members' funds can be leveraged on for the future, to give assurance that a person who retires in future will have a very decent retirement and also have a decent and happy retirement for today and for the future. Well, there are a number of things that are also very critical that were not of importance then. There was a clear distinction to date of who is the regulator in this market and who is the regulated entities. In the past, people used to think that the UBRA as an entity is actually another scheme that has come in to compete with NSSF. And when we were educating the masses about our function as a regulator, they took long to understand. But now I can affirm that the public, by and large, appreciates that there is a regulator in place, and that regulator also regulates NSSF, which is very, very, very critical, and to provide that very good distinction. There's a regulator who is UBRA. There are also regulated entities who include NSSF, the Parliamentary Pension Scheme, the Public Service who are yet to comply. There are also other regulated entities whom I've mentioned in the past. Those are the fund managers who are playing a lot of prudence in this market to provide that assurance of the investment. Thank you for your attention.